All right, it's morning at NTV. We continue on with Friday's edition, and this morning we're bringing you a topic that is of intrigue. It's not your ordinary conversation, and that is why we decided to bring it to the forefront of ordinary people, so that in one way or another you can understand how you are actually part of this conversation, how you are part of this discussion, and then how it's also part of you, because at the end of the day it's a two-way thing. And so we're going to be looking into museums, antiquities, as well as heritage. So our Kickstarter this morning is on reliving the experiences of art galleries, the trans-inclusion for museums, for galleries and heritage, and of course redefining museums as prepositioners of knowledge for us here in Uganda. One of my panelists here is well-traveled and speaks of their experience out there, and we hope that we can pick some lessons and adopt them for us as a country. My name is Priscilla Regina Dalwaga, glad to be in your company. Now, the Uganda Museum has existed since, you'll be shocked, 1908, and it carries a lot of meaning to us as a nation, especially when it comes to the preservation of culture, historical and traditional items of the country Uganda. You will find the first car there, you'll find the car that was driven by the first president there, and so all these things that connect us to history where we were not are found at the Uganda Museum. Now, this place has a collection of items that do range from art, from articles, from paintings, from colors, among so many other things, as the experts will be informing us. But Uganda as a country has close to 25 private community museums spread across the country, whose foci vary and include themes such as war and peace. Now, the rich history of Art Museum begins with the impressive collections in the antiquity, with the artwork and artifacts that were frequently kept in exclusive locations. Now, when I say exclusive, I'm talking about palaces, I'm talking about temples, I'm talking about private houses for the affluent of those days. Now, among the first organized collectors were the ancient Greek and Romans, whose patricians are renowned for their enormous collection of Greek artifacts, and it was paintings and sculptures mostly, but these collections actually function as status symbols as well as cultural archives and representing wealth and authority. So if you had some of these things, you had money, or you were considered rich of those days, not the buildings that we refer to today. And so you get to see that these have been with us since time memorial, and art museums and galleries have acted as guardians of history, culture, as well as the artistic impression, and they're now considered essential in the preservation of cultural legacy, especially where we are going. Everything is moving away from physical to digital, so there's that transition, and yet we have to preserve who we were to be and appreciate who we are and where we are going. Therefore, these establishments give insight into the human condition and are more than just static places or collections or artifacts. In fact, they are living and breathing places where the past and the present actually meet in one place. So we walk the path in the dynamics of these national threads, and I am joined by my experts here that are going to be giving us their opinion and how they end up in this interesting part of and sector that is not so common to many. It's not your regular go-to, but yet they've been able to thrive. To my immediate left, I am joined by a very educational person when it comes to the National Museum, a senior educator, and that is Mr. Vincent Ngavirano. We also do have next to him Dr. Elizabeth Chazike, who's the associate professor and archaeologist, as well as one who caters to archaeology and heritage. This is with Chambogo University, and of course our usual suspect Andrew Kagwa, who is an arts journalist with Daily Monitor. I will start with my immediate left, our guests, and then we'll conclude with Andrew. Your salutations.
Okay, thank you, Madam Priscilla. My name is Ngavirano Vincent, a senior educator at Uganda National Museum. And when I say senior educator, museums is all about education and public programs. What I do is to interpret, to educate the public, the students, and all learners of different categories. Yeah.
All right. Doctor?
Thank you so much, Madam Priscilla. Good morning, our viewers. and I know all Ugandans. This is a very pertinent topic. My name's Elizabeth Chazike. I'm an Associate Professor of Archaeology and Heritage in the Department of History, Archaeology and Heritage at Kyambogo University. I also serve as the Dean, Faculty of Arts and Humanities. And within this faculty, we are privileged to have the Bachelor of Cultural Heritage and the Bachelor of Archaeology and Heritage Management, the first of its kind in the country.
Wow.
Thank you so much.
You're most welcome. Thank you so much for your duties to nation. Yes, Andrew.
No, usual suspect, you said. So, yeah, Andrew Kagwa Maiga, arts and culture journalist. Yeah, basically that's it.
Okay, let me give this one to the doctor first. We do have museum, antiquities and heritage, but give us a breakdown to people who are not familiar or who don't walk in the same corridors with you on a daily basis.
Thank you so much, Madam Priscilla. I want to take our viewers first of all to the origin of the museum in Uganda in particular. You'll be shocked that the Uganda Museum is the oldest museum in the whole of East Africa.
Wow.
Having been established in 1908, as already mentioned, it started as a small center at what today we call Fort Lugard at Old Kampala. Yes, that is where it started. Like it was like a chic monument and with some collections, but as the collections expanded, the museum was moved to Makerere University, to the Margaret Trowell School of Industrial and Fine Arts.
Hey.
Yes.
You said we would be intrigued. We are already intrigued.
And that's around 1941. So in this history of the museum, Makerere University takes also a center stage. And it is from this that it was later moved to its original home, or to its current home, where it is located along Chitante Road. Yeah. So when you look at museums, or when you look at heritage generally, I also want to use this opportunity to educate our viewers about what heritage entails, because I think this is one of the areas which has really been misconceived greatly. Heritage is not only intangible. We have heritage which is tangible, which we can touch, and this is where archaeology comes in, because we deal with material things. We have heritage which is intangible. It could be in form of the music, and I think this is what has been so much popularized, the music and the games and all that. Also, our names, by the way, are intangible, because in most cases when you talk about heritage, the thinking is that, oh, it's about religion and all that. But heritage is more than that. And the moment you know that you have a name, that is the starting point of being part and parcel of this heritage. Because without that name, then without heritage, then you wouldn't be having such a name. Other than the tangible, intangible, heritage can be natural, and that's why we have like the wildlife. They could be forests, they could be mountains, and so on. So there's also natural heritage. There's heritage which you can move from place to place. This could be, that is where now the art can come in and all that. There's heritage which is immovable. It could be in form of the seas, the lakes, the rivers, and all that. So heritage is something really, really diverse. It's not all about our belief systems. It is more than that, and it is what we are, and because of that heritage, that is why we are here. So we find that this heritage can be collected in several maybe spaces or storage spaces, and one of them is the museum. So not everything could actually be in the museum. We have the museums, like Andrew will be speaking about the art. Some of them could be in the art galleries, and even within our own, let me say, I'll use the example, our own National Museum, we have galleries in different, that are talking about different things.
Yes.
First of all, we have the ethnographic collections. And actually this is like the beginning, because when the Uganda Museum was established by the colonialists, it started as a collection of ethnographic materials. And this is very clear from a few weeks ago when you look at some of the materials that were brought back from outside Uganda that were restituted. you find that most of them are ethnographic materials.
Okay, that word is sounding heavy to my producer. So
sorry.
Break it down to layman's language.
Okay. These are really materials that have to do with people's beliefs and all that. Okay. Yes, they are that kind of material. And at that time, the person who was in charge of starting the museum just instructed people to collect many of these things wherever they are and bring them to the Uganda Museum. And at that time, they were labeled as fetishes. And that's why when you look at the history of this museum, it started, they used to refer to it as Nyumba ya Mayembe, because they used to collect such kind of material within.
Right.
And I think that is where the story made the museums, or the perception of people about the museums, to really be negative about them because of the origin and what they were associated with. Of course, as we later see with the coming in of Christianity, nobody will want to associate themselves with such collections. But I'm happy to note that other than those, the Uganda Museum has a collection of natural history where you're going to navigate through nature, look at the plants, look at the snakes, look at the animals. So you can actually navigate Uganda by just being in the gallery. There are musical instruments that have been collected. Some of them are galleries showing issues to do with justice, the shields that were used in the past, the dressing patterns. There's also, maybe this could also be heavy for our viewers, the paleontological section, which is dealing with fossils. These are actually very ancient materials. The museum has also been upgraded. We have collections of the cars, as Priscilla already said, showing the different Ugandan leaders and the cars that they had. There's a section on archaeology, but most cases people refer to it as a section of Stone Age. But archaeology is not all about Stone Age. And this is also another thing maybe we also need to explain. The misconception. They are the village museum. Or the village, the houses behind the museum. And this,
which is what people are seeing on your screen right there.
Yes. So when you look at those huts behind there, they depict what would be in a setup of a home of anybody from a different ethnic backgrounds. So if you go to the Chiganda house, you definitely see how the Muganda used to stay in their home. If you go to the Hima house, you'll actually it shows what was there, and so many. The Lango house, as you see, I think there's also one which is also a house where they stored memories about the war in northern Uganda. And so you can be able to listen to people's voices about this war. So the museum is really diverse and has a lot of collections. They also sometimes run temporary exhibitions, like at some point they will show you the rock art. I remember there was an exhibition on rock art showing you what is happening in Eastern Uganda. An exhibition on milk and the products of milk.
I remember that one.
Yes. I remember at some point they were also showing the other year, independence, the road to independence for Uganda. Several of them. So they usually run several.
All right, so this makes me feel like I want to sit in your class, first of all. And then, because clearly there's a lot of, one, misinformation, two, misconception, and not minimal understanding of this sector, which then brings me to Vincent here, whose duty is to educate. Andrew and I don't know in your times, but Andrew and I, the only time we first had interface with the museum is school tours. And so that's the only way Ugandans have been able to know more about the museum and what is the heritage that is within the precincts of the museum. But of course, it seems to be a silent sphere in the night, and it begs the question, why is there so much silence? Or why is it the way it is for us here in Uganda, that it's not something that people will naturally go to? The likes of Andrew's friends have had to hold concerts there to have people attracted to then the museum and its intriguing elements.
The doctor has already mentioned it, because people still have a negative perception about it. But it is very interesting to note that the curriculum, our education system, has a bearing of the museum content. We have a rich content, and it is hinges in three pillars. We look at the past, present, and the future. Yes, since the younger generation are coming on board, the future is very bright in terms of the museums. And since the museum content has a bearing in our curriculum, the future is bright.
So when you say our curriculum, you're referring to the old one, the new one doesn't? The revised one?
They revised the curriculum.
Yeah.
The old one has the part of it, but now the current curriculum has turned a museum site as a learning laboratory. Let me put it like that.
All right.
So that is being evidenced by the influx of many schools that do come and visit us. Yes. We have topics, there are some topics, both on primary and secondary school levels. And even at the university levels. Professors, your students have been coming to museum to do research, and I've been helping them out in that research. So museum is a temple for learning, that I must say. Yeah. Okay.
All right, Andrew, you have had your local experience of Ugandan museums. You've also had the privilege of traversing different other countries and experiencing museums there. Compare and contrast.
Like I think he said the museum is a temple for learning, and I have a problem with that. Because you see, my very first time going to the museum, I was a child, and it was a school trip. But then when I started interacting a lot with the arts, I visited the museum more. I think I was very first there again in 2016 when the artist Taga was launching his book, a book of totems, like they're like paintings. And then the very first time I was at the museum, I was with my older brother who visited the museum again in 2019 because of the Da Vinci exhibition that came around. And like you see the difference, like, I mean, when I was at the museum with my brother, I was less than 10 years. And then he visited the museum again in 2019 because finally there was something he was interested in. And yet for all those years he had been coming to the museum for blankets and wine.
That's what I'm saying. Andrew's friends, they go there with their blankets and wine, but
and never entered the actual museum. So like I get a problem when it's more of a learning temple. Like it's good for it to be a learning temple, but then I should get a reason to be at the museum even when I'm not there for learning purposes, which I feel like we usually miss when it comes to Uganda, because in my experience when I visit other countries, for some reason I have to visit the museum because even before I take that plane, for some reason I know about that museum. Like I know I'm going to see some Da Vinci artifact that was kept there, and I've heard a lot about it. When I visit the museum, there are very many things that are in there that I feel most Ugandans do not know about, mainly because probably we did not give a fuss on them as us. We didn't say a lot about them. But then for some, like this, what's his name? Like this man who was in Uganda, there is his sculpture. Chibuka? No, not Chibuka. Like there is a sculpture of his head. Yes. Like when I got to know Mukasa's story, his story is like a movie. How he survived being martyred, and then how they kind of plotted to host Mwanga, and then how they plotted now to bring him back when there was a religious. Like his story is like a film. If more Ugandans knew that story, I believe they would have a reason to actually come to the museum. So like I feel like there are very many missed opportunities most of the times that kind of cocoon the museum into being like this educational center, which is a good thing. But I should want to be at the museum not necessarily because I'm researching. Like I feel like we missed that. Well,
you know, now that you mention it, I'm thinking there was a missed opportunity at the beginning of the year with NAM. And the museum should have been part of the place. places that our guests visited to appreciate our heritage and history as a country. Which brings me to the educator here. You get to see that you have to compete with modern times because, as Andrew has said, in our adult times, the only time we've had to associate with the museum is because of a concert, a party, a drink, some related thing, and they never ever. In the beginning, I thought maybe it's a collaboration with the museum to be able to introduce people to the spaces, but you get there and it has been turned into a Chivuru site, Vincent.
Of course, like Kazi has said, of course, people should not come to the museum only for study purposes. We have enough space. It is a spacious place. It sits on 5 acres of land, and behind there the gardens. We use it, of course, to have the Chevrolet. They are part of Ugandans, and it is very important to us because it's one of the avenues of marketing what the museum is. We wanted to move that negativity of perception, like as the doctor has put it rightly, because when the collections were collected, of course, the fetishes, the jargon which were collected there, they named the place as Nyumba ya Mahembe, and people still have that negative attitude towards the museum. So we are looking for all avenues to ensure that that negative perception is eroded off. Okay. Yes.
All right. If I might follow up, then it begs the question: what's the role of the National Museum in the modern era that we're in?
In the modern era, yes, this is a very good question. The role of the museum is to educate the people about the past, to preserve and protect our cultural heritage. And of course, as I've mentioned, there are centers for research. And of course, the role of museum, it is also an avenue for collecting money. Yes. Yes.
Okay. All right. Doctor, this year in May, we saw the government unveiling plans of constructing regional museums to promote and preserve our country's heritage and culture. What would be the impact of this heritage preservation countrywide?
Thank you so much, Madam Priscilla. I think by opening up regional museums, because, you know, issues of heritage are really, I would say, localized certain communities. So by having these regional museums, you are really taking the history to the owners. Yes. One of the things that is really also affecting this sector is us, maybe in the educational sector, thinking for the people. It is really right now the way to go is to work with the people. So by taking the museums to the communities where we are collecting the artifacts, like for instance, if I collect materials maybe from Nyero, rock paintings, that side in Kumi, there's no point of bringing the materials back to Kampala. Someone who goes to visit actually that is one way of transforming the museums, because they need to be transformed to show live history, other than just having, you know, what we have in the exhibitions, the way they were, that is maybe in some cases how they've been. So we need to be updating the collections, but also by having the regional museums, we are taking the history to the right owners who should speak for it. One of the things really about the museum, like Andrew has said, many people go to the museums as school children, but one of the things that will take you back is the experience you get as a visitor. So you'd want to get the right experience. And I think that if this museum is centered within that community, we are likely to get some people within the community to help us in interpreting the material, talk about the stories about this museum. I've seen a number of museums in different countries. I'll mention just one particular and very close in Kenya. There's the Karen Blexen Museum. This museum is actually one of the most visited museums. And it's just a house. And this house rotates on the life of Karen, who was one of the white settlers who had a farm.
I've heard that story of Karen. It's a famous story, yes.
It's really famous. And you know what? You just have to say, this is where Karen used to sleep. This was his bed. I've been to Nelson Mandela at Robben Island, and you know, everybody, you are eager to go. I want to go and see Mandela's cell. Live. They've tried to put there something like a bed. This is where Mandela used to sleep and all that. So we need to transform our museums into museums that tell the live history of the people, and I think by taking them to the communities or in the regions, this can be realized.
Okay. Andrew, in regards to development, I know this falls under directly tourism sector, but it's the most minimal of the attractions in the tourism sector, but yet it makes contribution. Do you feel it has made some significant contribution to the country?
The museums, I think it's a yes and no. Yes, because it's one of those tourism avenues that directly attract locals, either students, actually mostly as students. No, that it is not actually promoted as a tourism site, and
true,
and mainly it comes maybe from our tourism sector times looking at museums as a place, because if you notice, many of the other countries, they have the places, but they also look at sites. If that site has a story to tell, they'll somehow find a way of preserving it, and when you come around, there'll be people to take you around. In Uganda, some of the few people that have done that, and they have their story really mapped out, I think the people that are at the Rubili where I think the Kabaka was attacked from, like they have their story really mapped out. The artifacts are there. They will show you the gun, and then they will even tell you it stopped working. They will take you to those dungeons, and they have the story. They will even show you the wall writings that prisoners wrote, and like it's a very fascinating story. I do not really feel like our tourism sectors, one, looked at museums that way, and then they've even not looked at our historical sites that way.
What would be your recommendation from your experiences?
I think we need to write our story. We need to start by documenting our story. One of the reasons we do not care about these things is we do not know the story. We do not relate with it that much, because even if it's the museum itself,
like to hear the story, you have to go to Vincent.
That's partly one of you have to go to Vincent to hear the story. At times I don't really think I've had the experience at the Uganda Museum that is equal to the experience I had at the palace of the Kabaka when I visited it. Like, man, when that woman was telling us this story, because I was with some tourists who are not Ugandans, and I was there for the first time as well. Like, when you had that story, it was chilling, and she was showing you, like, for example, one of the prisoner wrote, "Obote, you've done this to me, I'll never forget you." Like it was very personal the way they narrated these stories. Like, I think there are very many things at the museum that have a deeper story that we've never had. When you look at those cars, I believe there are deeper stories to those cars
definitely
than we've been told. So we need to get that story together.
Okay.
Like, the moment you get that documentation, like, there is more you can tell people.
Doctor wants to defend.
Okay, not really to defend. I just wanted to add that I think since we have like more or less like one museum, I know that there are several regional museums and all that, but currently the National Museum is congested with a lot of, I would say, history, with so many stories. In other countries, the way to go is to have maybe themed museums, such that we know that, okay, this one is centered on music, and so if we want to understand about music, that is where to go. So we find so many stories within one space, and I'm sure they are maybe moving towards that. And I'm also requesting that Uganda should look at museums as a real profession, not something that because you are interested in heritage, then you go and start talking about a story. We need to have people who are trained. People need to be skilled to tell this story well. Because sometimes, this is not really at the Ghana National Museum, because I've gone to many of these museums, even regional. You get surprised when you hear some of the stories being told, and you're like, oh, I think this is not supposed to be like this, but it is going out. So we need to have people trained, and that's why I'm saying that now, as Chambogo, we have already given the answers, and we have the programs. Come, register, enroll. You can study in the evening, you can study on weekends, and at least we have professional people who are going to act as our guides in the museums, such that they tell the stories well.
Yes, the guides.
I would like to understand, and from you as well, like how much power does the museum have? Like, can the museum, for example, allow, say, the National Theatre to start their own collection of music and theatre? Can they allow, say, UBC to start their collection of media? Like, how much power do they have when it comes to empowering other people to start collecting?
Okay, I think this is also one way to tell our listeners that recently there's a new bill that was passed about this museum, and so there are now very clear strategies, and the policies are very clear on how you can start other museums. I can give examples. I know that the Ugandan Parliament is starting a museum, and one of the people in charge was our student. UPDF is starting a museum, and I'm sure their collection will be centered on the military and all that. So there are really guidelines. It's just a matter of go to the museum and engage with them, but they have very clear guidelines of starting these museums. That's why we have several community museums, and I'm sure maybe some members of Uganda community museums are on air and are listening. They have a very big association. They have started their own museums, and it is very possible if UBC wanted, if NTV wanted, universities, I'm sure Imakere recently had something they started on related to Uganda, but they have always had a museum, and many institutions really should be encouraged to start those specialized museums to decongest the stories that at the National Museum.
All right, Vincent.
Yes, I want to comment on Mr. Kazibu's comment when he said that one of the prisoners commented that I will never forget Obote when in Rubidi there. When we are showcasing something or want to put something on a showcase in the Uganda Museum, we are very sensitive about political statements. For such a statement, for us, we cannot put it there because we don't want to have people divided. Because people who are pro-Obote, when they read it, they don't feel happy. Yes.
Okay, all right. Now we also have one for you. At the end of the day, one of the things that are failing the tourism sector by and large is promotion and marketing. As one who's a custodian at the museum, are there any strategies that you have implemented or intend to implement to have as much word out there and engagement of society and community into the works of the museum through promotion and marketing?
Thank you, Madam Priscilla. In recent past, we secured a van from World Bank, and we are moving to reach out to the audience. Last year in December, I was in Sembabule district to reach out to the secondary schools and primary schools there, to see what to make sure that the public know what we do and what we have. Yes, this is one of the avenues that we are trying to put in place to reach out to especially the disadvantaged rural schools which cannot be kept up to the Uganda National Museum. We
are in an era of ICT. TikTok is moving businesses and information.
Yes.
Yet I know with the conversation that we're having, it comes with terms and conditions that do apply in terms of protection of our heritage. And so I'll start with a comment from you, Vincent, in that regard, merging ICT with what you're actually doing.
Yes, recently they have already developed an app for doing such. Yesterday we were in a meeting and we have gotten the experts from IT. They are working on it. Yes.
Okay, all right. Doctor, as one who's encouraging and making sure that you impart wisdom to others to grow this side of the sector, ICT, how does it help, or how can it support you in doing the work that you're doing?
I think there's no way we can actually be out of this. ICT is now the way to go in as far as the museums are concerned, because I'm happy that Vincent here has said that they have an app. I think I saw at some point when they were exhibiting oil. You would go there in the museum, that is the National Museum, and then they could take you through the whole process of oil and all that in Uganda. So IT is the way to go to improve our exhibits. This will bring in the reality that I'm talking about. 2 weeks ago, I visited the Vienna Museum of Natural History, and almost each exhibition, almost each place where they have any exhibit, it is digitized and takes you through the whole story. And now, of course, with artificial intelligence, there's no way we can hide our heads. But now the question will be that this also requires some bit of investment. I don't want to take you too much into how does the museum sustain itself and all that. It's a government entity. So it means that government must look at this sector as all the other sectors, worth investing in, and give it a budget that can be used to improve this. But IT is the way to go. We need to digitize our entry points, because why would I come and line up? I'm still writing my name maybe somewhere. We need to do all this. So digitalization is the issue. We need to involve ourselves in the use of social media to attract the youth, because these are really the biggest visitors to the museums. And this is not only a Ugandan issue. The world over, museums are mainly visited by children, school children. But for the case of Uganda, even outsiders, I've done some research, and some foreigners are really the key visitors. Us ourselves as Ugandans, anytime when you are a little free, people don't think of a museum as a place to go. Unless, like Priscilla said, maybe there's a beer party and all that. So it is high time we changed our mindset and looked at a museum as a place worth visiting in our free time for entertainment. And that means that it also needs to put in some catalysts that will encourage people.
And I think that's later on we'll be asking ourselves that question: what can be the catalysts to be able to promote you know, the works that are being done there? But Andrew, from your perspective, the engagement of ICT and how it can actually propel you know, the antiquities, the galleries, the stories that you're talking about, to get to the people faster.
One virtual reality, like there's a way people have incorporated virtual reality into museums. It's like you can just click on a website and you put on your headset, the virtual reality headset, and technically take a tour around a gallery or a cathedral somewhere. And of course, much as it feels like you've been there, like that makes you feel like you should actually be there physically. We've not incorporated those tours. It's like when it comes to Ugandan tourism, everyone needs to come down to Uganda to see things. You do not have that teaser before you come down to Uganda. So I think that's one. Or
you don't have that interface that actually makes you excited to look forward to.
Yes, I think that's an area we should be thinking about. I know someone is trying to document one of Ugandan tribes and their way of life using virtual reality. I don't know if the museums are on board, but yeah, I think that's one of the ways we can actually use ICT, like getting things on a portal that someone can experience it even without coming down here.
Okay, all right. Protection of heritage, Doctor. In our line of work, you know, we follow up on a story of the Prime Minister handing over botanical gardens to be converted into Ekinyumiro. This is a place that I have had the privilege of going over and over again, and the reason I go there is simply because of the heritage that is there, untouched and untampered with. Now, with this direction that the government took, where's the protection of our heritage?
Thank you. One of the challenges that we have is the conflict between heritage and development. We want the developments, but we also want to preserve and conserve the heritage. So the way to go is that we really need to strike a very clear balance between the two. Let us not compromise the heritage for the sake of development. And that's where the archaeologists come in. Before such projects are taken on, engage the archaeologists, the heritage experts to assess the impact of these projects. There are very clear ways where we could say, okay, we want maybe to have this kind of development in place, but what are the impacts of this kind of development? How can we mitigate the impacts? How can we reduce them? In some instances, like you said, this could be one way of leading us into forming regional museums. If you're going maybe to destroy a certain place, look at Clock Tower. Let's have something in place.
Where is our clock, by the way?
I cannot know. Let us have something.
That was a very significant monument there.
Yes, yes. So we need to first of all look at the document. Is there a way we can document and keep memories of this heritage if the worst comes to the worst and it has to be replaced and has to move?
Okay.
But this business of just putting up developments.
Yeah, because we have also recently lost the first mall in Uganda to development. We're losing quite a number of heritage buildings within the capital city. Now, I imagine what is happening outside the capital city. And yet, having had a visit to Kenya, their first mall is still standing, and it last year celebrated 50 years.
Wow.
They have only added other elements, but keeping the original building and structure and how it was designed. And even then, there's a floor where they actually give you the history of the first people, the first sailors, the first buyers, the first what. And I was like, wow. And this is just a mall, by the way, but I was wowed by that. So how do we actually merge this? Because if we don't, we're going to lose out on a lot.
It goes back also to policy, that we need to have very clear policies on such, especially buildings. We need to know that maybe at a certain period of time, in some countries they'll say any building which makes 100 years, it automatically qualifies to be, even if it is your own house, you cannot just go and demolish it. It becomes part of the country, because heritage is for us all. It's not owned by any individual. And so it means that government and the museums, who are the, let me say, the chief custodians, should work hand in hand to see that they enforce such policies if they are in place, to see how they can negotiate with the owners of some of these spaces or some of these buildings that are worth preserving, such that people do not go and demolish them and change them anyhow.
Doctor, I think it should start with those buildings having value, like having value to the people that are owning them before you stop them from demolishing them. Or because I look at this in a way that when we visit other countries, for example, Notre Dame has value to the people that are keeping it, and that's the reason they are keeping it. When you come back down to Uganda, you look at one of our first cinemas, which is occupied by Watoto. Like, one, they would want to enlarge, and if you're telling them not to enlarge, and they are not even seeing the value that's coming from not enlarging or demolishing it and building something new overall, like why are you even telling them not to? Because
when you're not utilizing it for the historical implication it is.
Because there was a time I'm still one of the defenders of that building to stay. But when it came down to the actual conversations and people asking what value is keeping this adding, like, we were also chasing blanks.
And actually, for that one, the advantage they have is that the story of Odeon Cinema, as it was called at that time, has a contribution to what the church is today, you know, because it was a safe house, and so when the church started, they had to interface with, you know, a lot of blood and things like that. So that being part of their story today is one of the reasons as to why that building, you know, or answers the question that Andrew is trying to ask.
Yeah. So at times when you're going to ask someone to keep the space because it has this heritage, they will keep asking you what value is keeping it adding. because right now I don't think Buganda would ask you what value the palace is adding. Like tourists are coming in all the time. Like there is some monetary value to it. So they can't even think about demolishing it.
Okay. All right, John, how are we able to run operations in our Ugandan museum, and what is the source of funding and income? I'll give this question to Vincent.
The source of income, it is still a challenge because we are depending entirely on the government. It is a government entity, and as per your definition, it is a non-profit making institution.
Okay.
So we cannot commercialize the culture. That's why most often times the entry fee is not much. It is feasible for each and everybody. So I think for us, if we are to generate more income, we're going to write much more about the brochures, purchase more souvenirs for the tourists to come, because now we are promoting cultural tourism through museums. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Doctor, what are art galleries?
Art galleries, of course, this should go to Andrew. Because this is really his docket.
Yeah.
Andrew?
Art galleries. Okay, art galleries exist to exhibit different artists. And there are some national art galleries that are kind of doing the work of museums. Those ones will keep your celebrated artists, some of whom are not here. Our national gallery is Normal Gallery in Nakasero, but most of the other galleries are representing artists and exhibiting them specifically. In a nutshell, that's what they are doing. Though the role of galleries and museums in some places is more or less the same. There are more Ugandan artists, unfortunately, whose work is not in Uganda but is in museums in Germany, in Belgium, mainly because probably the installations were too large to put in any gallery around, and when you're thinking about the space you have at the museum, you do not see how it can work out, and then a gallery, a museum in Germany offers, and you give them the work and they kind of keep it and you feel it's very safe in there. So it's more or less the same, but most galleries are very commercial. Like they will have your work for some time, they will sell it, and then they will represent you to other buyers, and then they will keep exhibiting new people that keep coming up.
Okay, all right. The side of the galleries, from my experience, one, they're very expensive. You get to find an art piece that I can't say you can do yourself, but your mind tells you that you can do it yourself. And it's going for 10 million Ugandan shillings, and you're asking yourself, what am I paying for? And so let's answer that question of what are people paying for?
In art, you're buying the artist, not necessarily the work. When the value of the artist goes up, all his works go up. Say, if I painted something blank today and it was 100K Ugandan shillings, and then tomorrow I paint something and it's $100,000, the painting I did yesterday that was 100,000 Ugandan shillings will also become $100,000. Like the value of the artist impacts all the work he has done, which is the reason why most Europeans are collecting African artists before they become a big deal. They collect them, keep them, and at times try to promote them in that market, that by the time they become a big deal, they have a bulk of their work they can come out with. because when it comes to art, people are buying the name. Like when people hear about Zenson, they believe everything Zenson is doing is a masterpiece. Just like you believe everything Da Vinci has done was a masterpiece. Even the works you've never seen, you believe they are masterpieces. There are people that will want to see that work.
People would want to buy the brush
just because
an arm and a leg.
It's Da Vinci. So that's how art is. That's why art is usually very expensive. Okay.
Its appreciation here in Uganda, how has it been over the course of time?
It's an acquired taste. And to tell you the truth, the biggest collectors of Ugandan art are not Ugandans, which is sad.
Very true. There's a man, he passed on recently. He had a house in Machindia, and he was a collector of Ugandan art. Like he had a storied house, but right from the door, all the walls up to the floor up were all Ugandan art. But he's not even Ugandan.
Yeah, the biggest collectors of Ugandan art are non-Ugandans, which is kind of a weakness of the art industry when it comes to trying to reach out to Ugandans, because some of these Ugandans go out to China and buy very bad art. And at times they are buying it at the money they could get some Ugandan art. But that's mainly because the Ugandan art industry has not tried to reach out to them or to get to them. Because, man, when you see how exhibitions are happening, there are chances you will not feel very welcome. Not that they stop you from being there, but the nature of it, it's a ballroom, people are taking wine. Like, as an ordinary Ugandan who probably comes and gets a bottle of beer, or you're eating some donuts, you're thinking, okay, am I welcome into this space? Yeah, so I do not really feel like art has tried to reach out to a Ugandan who is a possible collector that much.
Yes, Doctor.
Thank you so much. I think even Ugandans who have tried to reach out, the Ugandan thinking and maybe mindset is that, you know, they really don't treasure their own more than what is done elsewhere. So actually I'm not shocked when Andrew says that most of our pieces are displayed in the museums or elsewhere out, because there people appreciate the artists and then they can pay for their materials. Like, of course, we are aware that Kenzo's pieces or awards are in the Uganda Museum. That is a test. Maybe it's just like, okay, let me put them there and see if Ugandans can appreciate my name being displayed in the museum and all this. So we need to move away from this and also start appreciating our own. If you go elsewhere, they will be selling very small souvenirs, very expensively, and we buy them. The same Ugandans who buy them there should now start also appreciating the art pieces and buy and add value to our art.
All right. Vincent, would you like to make a comment?
Yes, the comment she has mentioned in the Kenzo, and I wish all the artists can bring all those awards to the Uganda Museum, because they are inspirational to the younger generation. Yes.
All right. Now, in terms of inspiration and experience, the art, especially when you look at the museum, for example, the experience is still wanting, Vincent, in all honesty and manner. In terms of, you know, well, because, you know, this is an experience that contributes to your mental capacity, your mental health, your happiness, your well-being, when you're walking through the different chapters of society and evolution. You want to feel a certain way, and so it begs the question, as one of the custodians at the museum, how does the museum intend to improve people's experiences of their visits there?
First of all, it is very good to note that we are soon going under renovation to put to make a museum in a modern way. You have said you want to move from manual to digital, and the museum, when it is renovated, I think we shall have a large influx of the visitors according to the content we shall add on. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Speaking of additions, I know that, Doctor, there's a countrywide limitation of experts in archaeology, in heritage, and yet they are important for this work to actually continue. So how viable and beneficial is this profession in the first place?
This profession is viable because there are many opportunities out there. Of course, I'll begin with the at home. What I know is that you can actually teach it because we are really yearning for lecturers in this field in all universities. And I must say that Chambogo University has 3 out of the PhDs in the whole country, meaning that we are like only 4 PhDs within Uganda right now, and 3 of them are employed by Chambogo University.
Wow.
So that shows the shortage we have in terms of teaching in this profession. Besides that, of course, as we are talking about the museum, they need them to work in these museums. They need them to work as their curators, as exhibitors, but also as in terms of doing research. There's a lot, because one of the things that is affecting most of our museums is that we need to document, we need to come up with new stories or with actually accurate stories, not to rely on the stories that were given to us by our colonial masters.
Okay.
So, like in the oil sector, I'm very sure recently, if you check in the papers, ECOP wanted almost like 50 archaeologists to go and assess the impact of their oil wells, but you cannot get them. So even if they ask, they are not there. So even like in other countries, by the way, even if you are building your own house, you need an archaeologist to first test and assess the impact. We have now moved into DNA. So we need to identify evidences of ancient DNA through this archaeology. So in other words, it's really multidisciplinary. It will take you into architecture, it will take you into this science and all that, and also in the humanities. So there are so many avenues.
Maybe Doctor, you can explain more about the curation, because many people are not familiar with that word. Yes.
You can educate educate them about
curation, because since we have developed that discipline, now as he has said, it is as shall say, it is a new discipline, and not many people understand it.
Maybe I would have started by explaining what archaeology is.
Yes, and
archaeology is simply the study of the past, but using materials. I'm very sure right now all of us have phones and all that. There's going to be an era when you are going to study the archaeology of these phones, the archaeology of the 21st century. It's about the materials that you used. What do they say about it? Usually when I'm teaching my class, I start with the girls and say, when you look at your handbag, what you have in there tells a lot about you, your behaviors and all that. So we look at these materials and then interpret them and show what kind of behavior did people, maybe how did they live in the past. That's one way of knowing about the economic, social, political aspects, by just looking at the material remains that they left behind. And so these materials, especially the ones in the museum, are called artifacts, coming from the word art. These are remains. Why they are artifacts? Because they must have been modified by human beings. They must have had a human touch. That's why they're artifacts.
All right, so we are coming to the end of this conversation, and it begs the question, where do we go from here? In your various capacities, what's your commitment? One, in your responsibilities or duties, but also to the public and society by and large, in protection, preservation, but also promotion of museums, our heritage, as well as our artifacts. Let me start with you, Vincent.
After here, of course, we need a strong campaign to create our public awareness about museums through carrying out the outreach, educational programs and public programs to reach out to the audience so that people understand the roles of the museum play in the society. And museums are very important institutions in our society. And at international level, museums are protected by international humanitarian law. So, which means they are very, 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 very important.
All right. Thank you very much, Vincent Ngavirano. Doctor?
Thank you so much. For me, like within my mandate, it is really in education and as in training. So I think from here, and what I've always done passionately is to ensure that Uganda gets the right people who are trained within this discipline of archaeology and heritage. And also, like he's saying, we need to do more sensitization. So we look forward to more shows like this to speak to our audience about this field, which is really not so much known by people. Many people do not understand what we do, but I think with more engagements, people will come to appreciate, and we'll keep speaking to them. And
all right, that is Dr. Elizabeth Chazike, Associate Professor, Archaeology and Heritage with Chambogo University. And finally, Andrew?
Well, I think it starts with us, because I just remember I visited the Ham Mukasa home, the two homes, and man, they've really documented their stories. One of them, I think, is the oldest house. It's one of the oldest houses in Uganda. So I think it should start with us. You start from home, writing your own history, and the moment you do that, trust me, other people will, there will be a ripple effect, and probably by the time it will get to the National Museum, we shall have more stories to tell and more people to attract.
All right, thank you so much, Andrew Kagwa, an arts journalist with the Daily Morning.